The sun had only just dipped below the horizon when I noticed the porch light across the street flicker on. It was the kind of light that didn't just chase away the dark, but instead painted it in soft amber tones, warm and inviting. I stood by my own window for a moment longer than I should have, watching the way it stretched across the quiet road. Then I saw her, my neighbor. She stepped onto her porch, her movements unhurried, graceful in a way that only comes with time and confidence. She spotted me almost immediately. Even from across the street, I could see her smile, small but real, carrying something unspoken. She lifted her hand and gave the slightest wave, as if testing whether I would notice, whether I would respond. My heart jumped in my chest before I could even think. I waved back, awkward but eager, and then came the part that caught me off guard. She tilted her head, motioning for me to come over. It was such a simple gesture, but it carried weight. An invitation, not shouted across the street, but felt. The kind that lingers in the air, making you wonder if you'd imagined it. But when she gave a little nod, as if to confirm what I'd seen, I knew it was real. For a moment I hesitated. I wasn't expecting this, wasn't prepared for it. She was older, poised, someone who carried herself with the kind of calm maturity I'd always admired but never fully understood. And yet here she was across the street, asking me into her world. My chest tightened with a mix of nerves and curiosity. The neighborhood was still, the only sounds the faint chirp of crickets and the distant hum of a car passing somewhere blocks away. Every step I took down my porch stairs and onto the pavement felt strangely amplified, as if the night itself was watching. The air was cooler now, brushing against my skin, carrying the faint scent of fresh earth after a long, warm day. As I crossed the street, I couldn't stop noticing the details about her. The way her hair was loosely tied back, strands slipping free to frame her face. The soft, casual sweater she wore, hanging comfortably yet with a quiet elegance. She didn't look rushed. She didn't look nervous. She looked at ease, as though my presence was exactly what she'd expected. When I finally reached the base of her porch steps, she leaned lightly against the railing, her eyes meeting mine with an expression that was both welcoming and unreadable. Up close, her smile felt even warmer, and for a moment I forgot about the unease in my chest. "Come in," she said softly, her voice carrying over the night air like a quiet melody. And just like that, the street behind me seemed to disappear. The moment I stepped through her front door, I felt the shift. The outside world, with its quiet street and cool air, seemed to fall away behind me. Inside, everything felt warmer, softer, as though I had stepped not just into her house, but into a part of her life she rarely opened to anyone. The first thing I noticed was the scent. It was faint but unmistakable, jasmine tea, earthy and calming, mingled with something older, like the worn pages of a beloved book. It gave the air a lived-in familiarity, the kind of fragrance that clings to memory more than to objects. She closed the door gently behind me, the sound quiet and deliberate, almost as if she didn't want to disturb the atmosphere she had created. I glanced around while trying not to look like I was staring. Lamps glowed from the corners of the living room, their golden light washing over the space in soft shadows. There was no harsh brightness here. Everything seemed designed to soothe. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled not just with novels, but with travel guides, framed photos, and small trinkets collected over time. A knitted throw was folded neatly across the arm of the sofa. On the side table sat a single candle, its flame flickering as if it had been lit just for tonight. "I hope it's not too messy," she said with a small laugh, though I couldn't imagine anyone seeing this room as anything less than comforting. Her voice carried that mix of self-awareness and grace, as though she was inviting me into more than just her home, but her vulnerabilities too. "Messy," I replied, smiling as I looked around again. "It feels warm, like it's meant to be lived in." She tilted her head slightly at that, and I caught a spark of something in her eyes. Relief, maybe, or just the simple gratitude of being seen. She moved toward the kitchen with an easy rhythm, asking over her shoulder, "Tea? Or maybe a glass of wine?" My answer didn't matter as much as the way she offered it, the openness, the casual kindness. I said tea would be fine, and a few minutes later she returned with two delicate cups, steam rising faintly from them. As she handed one to me, her fingers brushed lightly against mine. The contact was brief, almost accidental, but it was enough to send a subtle warmth traveling through my hand, settling somewhere deeper. We sat down across from each other at a small wooden table near the window. Outside, the night pressed gently against the glass, but in here, Everything felt cocooned in golden quiet. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, but my attention kept drifting back to her movements, her smile, the calm way she carried herself. And as we sipped in the hush of that room, I realized this wasn't just a casual invitation. This was the beginning of something neither of us had planned, but both of us seemed quietly willing to explore. The first sip of tea steadied me, but it was her presence across the table that kept pulling me inward. She sat with her back straight but relaxed, her hands lightly cradling her cup as though savoring not just the warmth but the quietness of the moment itself. The golden lamplight softened the angles of her face, catching in her eyes every time she looked at me. We began with small talk, the weather, how strangely quiet the street felt tonight, even the quirks of our other neighbors. It was ordinary conversation, the kind you could have with anyone. Yet with her, it felt different. Every word seemed to carry an undercurrent, as if something heavier waited beneath the surface. She told me about the house, how she had lived here for over a decade, how it had changed along with her. She mentioned her travels too, brief snapshots of places she had loved. A rainy week in Paris, a winding coastal road in Italy, a summer spent learning to cook in a village where no one spoke her language. Her voice grew softer when she spoke about those memories, the way her eyes drifted not to me, but somewhere inward, as if reliving the moments. I listened, captivated not just by the stories but by her. The way her hands moved subtly when she spoke, the curve of her smile when she laughed at her own recollection, the silence she allowed to linger when words weren't enough. And then there were the pauses, long enough to feel intentional, short enough to never be uncomfortable. In those pauses, I felt something stir, a quiet electricity, as though the air itself leaned closer. She would look at me then, not in the polite way neighbors do, but with a gaze that seemed to search. It was steady, unhurried, and every time her eyes lingered a second too long, my chest tightened with a mix of anticipation and nervousness. I tried to match her openness, sharing little pieces of myself, where I had grown up, the small struggles of finding my footing, the things I hoped to do. She listened with an attentiveness that surprised me, as though every word mattered. There was no rush in her, no urge to interrupt or shift the focus. She simply listened. At one point, as she laughed gently at something I had said, her hand brushed against the edge of the table near mine. Not quite a touch, but close enough that the space between us felt suddenly charged. I didn't move my hand away. I left it there, suspended in possibility, aware of how little it would take for the gap to close. The conversation carried on, but the words began to feel less important than the silences between them. It wasn't just talking anymore, it was something slower, deeper. A rhythm of shared presence, of glances held a fraction too long, of the quiet realization that we both felt the same unspoken pull. And though neither of us named it aloud, I could sense it in the air. Something was shifting. After nearly an hour at the small wooden table, she set her cup down and leaned back slightly, her eyes soft but thoughtful. "We don't have to sit here all night," she said with a quiet smile. "Come, the sofa is more comfortable." Her tone was casual, but the suggestion felt heavier than it sounded. I nodded, my heart picking up a little as I followed her into the living room. The sofa was already waiting beneath the warm glow of a nearby lamp, draped with a knitted throw I had noticed earlier. She motioned for me to sit, and I lowered myself onto one end while she settled gracefully beside me. Not too close, but close enough that the air between us thinned. For a few moments, we simply sat. The cushions dipped slightly under our weight, bringing us subtly toward one another. She reached forward to adjust the small candle on the coffee table, its flame dancing in response to her movement. As she leaned back, her shoulder brushed mine. Light, accidental perhaps, but it sent a ripple through me all the same. I didn't pull away. Neither did she. Instead, she reached for a photo book that rested on the table, her fingers brushing the cover with a quiet fondness. "I keep these out," she said softly. "Sometimes, on nights like this, it feels nice to look back." She placed it between us and opened it, pages filled with photographs that seemed to span decades, trips, celebrations, candid moments. She leaned in closer so we could both see. Her arm touched mine fully now, the fabric of her sleeve grazing against me. The warmth of her body seeped through, steady and undeniable. I told myself to focus on the photos, on the stories she was sharing, but it was impossible to ignore the way my chest tightened at every brush of contact. She pointed to one picture, a younger version of herself standing at a seaside cafe, her hair wild from the wind. "That was Italy," she explained, her laugh low and self-conscious. I remember feeling so alive that day, like the world was bigger than I could ever know. I glanced from the photo back to her, catching the way her face softened as she spoke. The lamplight picked out strands of her hair, and for a moment I forgot to breathe. She noticed my silence, her eyes lifting to meet mine. There was no rush in the way she looked at me, just patience, a quiet steadiness that seemed to ask a question without words. I felt it then, the shift. We were no longer just neighbors, no longer just two people sharing tea and conversation. Something had tilted, something unspoken yet undeniable. I didn't move away. Neither did she. Instead, the room seemed to draw tighter around us, the candlelight flickering, the night pressing softly at the windows, while her arm remained against mine, her closeness both grounding and electrifying. And in that gentle, unhurried way, we crossed the first invisible line between distance and connection. The photo book rested open on the table, but neither of us seemed interested in turning another page. Instead, we lingered in that quiet space between words, our arms still lightly touching, our breaths falling into a natural rhythm. The candle flickered, throwing small, shifting shadows against the walls, as if the room itself were listening. She closed the album gently and folded her hands on her lap, her gaze dropping for a moment before lifting again. Her smile was softer now, edged with something fragile. "You know," she began, her voice quiet but steady, "I don't usually do this. Invite people over like this, I mean." I stayed silent, sensing that what she was about to say carried more weight than casual conversation. Her eyes drifted toward the window, where the street outside lay still under the dim glow of street lamps. Most of the time, I keep to myself. People are friendly, of course, but inviting someone into your home, into your space, it's different. It feels like you're giving them more than just a seat on the sofa. You're letting them see who you are, flaws and all. There was a vulnerability in her words that caught me off guard. She was usually so composed, so sure of herself. Seeing her hesitate, even for a moment, felt like being handed something precious. I leaned forward slightly, not wanting to crowd her, but wanting her to feel my attention fully. "I'm glad you did," I said quietly. "I don't take it lightly. If anything, I feel lucky to be here." Her eyes flickered back to mine, searching, as if trying to measure the sincerity behind my words. Whatever she saw there seemed to soften her expression. She let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. "You make it sound simple. But it isn't always that simple, is it?" I shook my head slowly. "No. But maybe that's what makes it matter." She studied me for a long moment. Her fingers twisted lightly together in her lap, betraying a nervousness that her calm voice didn't reveal. Then she admitted, barely above a whisper, "I wasn't sure if asking you over tonight was a mistake." Her words tightened something in my chest, not out of fear, but out of the sudden realization of how much this moment meant to her. I wanted to reach for her hand, to reassure her with touch, but instead I let my voice carry the weight. "It's not a mistake," I said firmly. "I wouldn't be sitting here if it was." Her lips curved, almost reluctantly, into a faint smile. I saw a glimmer in her eyes then, not just relief, but something more vulnerable, more hopeful. She looked at me as though she wanted to believe me, as though she needed to. In that stillness, I realized the truth. This wasn't just about an evening visit. This was about trust, and she had just placed it in my hands. The silence after her confession hung between us, not heavy, but full, like the pause before a song's next note. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, her shoulders held just a little tighter than before, as if she had said too much. I could see the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, a quiet fear that I might turn away. I didn't. Instead, I shifted just enough to close the small space between us. My arm brushed hers again, deliberate this time, steady. Her breath caught so faintly that I almost missed it. Slowly, almost as though testing her own courage, she let her hand slide from her lap to rest lightly on the sofa cushion beside mine. For a moment, she hesitated there, the smallest distance between us still intact. Then her fingers shifted, an inch closer, then another, until they brushed the back of my hand. The touch was featherlight, tentative, but it was enough to set something alight inside me. My instinct was to respond, and so I did, turning my hand ever so slightly, letting my fingers curl around hers. The contact was simple, but it felt immense. Warmth bloomed where our skin met, quiet but powerful, a shared acknowledgement of what neither of us had dared to say aloud. Her gaze lowered, watching our joined hands for a moment before lifting back to mine. There was no smile this time, no mask of ease. Her eyes were bare, vulnerable, and in them I saw the truth. She wanted this too. Without speaking, she leaned gently toward me, her movements slow, cautious, as though afraid to break the fragile spell. Her head came to rest against my shoulder, her hair brushing my jaw, soft and faintly scented with jasmine from the tea we had shared. The weight of her cheek against me was delicate, yet grounding, as though she had finally allowed herself to let go of the distance she had been holding. I didn't move for a long while. I simply sat there, listening to the quiet rhythm of her breathing, feeling the subtle steadiness of her presence pressed lightly against me. My heart raced in my chest, but in her closeness, I also felt calm, like the world had narrowed to this one moment, this one shared space between us. My free hand shifted slightly, almost unconsciously, resting near her arm, brushing against the soft fabric of her sleeve. I could feel the faint warmth of her skin beneath, the nearness of her pulse. She didn't flinch. Instead, she sighed, soft, almost inaudible, a sound of release more than words. Time seemed suspended there. The candle flickered low, shadows swayed on the walls, but nothing outside that room seemed to matter. The quietness wasn't empty. It was full of everything we couldn't yet say, everything we didn't need to. For the first time all evening, the hesitation between us had dissolved, and what remained was simple, unspoken, undeniable connection. The night stretched on unhurried, as though it understood that neither of us wanted to move just yet. She remained against my shoulder, her hand still wrapped in mine, and in that stillness, we found a kind of peace I hadn't known I needed. We spoke only in fragments, small observations, soft laughter, little stories that slipped easily into the quiet. But eventually, she shifted slightly, lifting her head with a reluctant grace. "It's getting late," she murmured, her voice low, as if even saying it felt like breaking a spell. I nodded, though part of me wished the hours would stretch longer. She rose first, smoothing the fabric of her sweater with a nervousness that surprised me. For someone so composed, the faint tremor in her movements betrayed how much this evening had meant to her. I stood as well, following her toward the front door. The lock clicked softly as she turned it, and when she opened the door, the cool night air spilled in. It carried the scent of damp grass and faint earth, sharper after hours inside the warm glow of her home. We stepped onto the porch together, the wooden boards creaking gently beneath our weight. The street was almost completely still now. The distant hum of traffic had quieted, and only the occasional chirp of a cricket broke the silence. Above us, the sky was scattered with faint stars, blurred slightly by the glow of the street lamps. It was the kind of night that felt secret, as though the world had shrunk to this one patch of earth where we stood. She turned toward me, her hand resting lightly on the railing. "Thank you for coming over," she said, her tone carrying more meaning than the words themselves. I wasn't sure how tonight would feel, but I'm glad. I smiled, my chest tightening at the sincerity in her voice. "I'm glad too," I replied. "More than you know." For a moment, we simply stood there, the quiet stretching again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was warm, like an invisible thread linking us. She reached out then, almost without thinking, her fingertips brushing lightly along my arm. It was the gentlest touch, but it left an echo that would linger long after I crossed the street. I didn't want to overstep, so I let the moment hold, savoring it instead of rushing it. Her eyes met mine once more, steady and unreadable, and then she smiled, small but real. A smile that felt like both an ending and a beginning. "Good night," she whispered. "Good night," I answered, my voice softer than I expected. I stepped down from her porch, each footfall measured, reluctant. Crossing the street back to my own home, I turned once at the halfway point. She was still there, standing in the glow of her porch light, watching quietly. By the time I reached my door, I realized I was smiling. Something had begun tonight, not loud, not rushed, but steady. And though it was unspoken, I knew I would never see that porch light the same way again.